Hello everyone, welcome to this Substance Designer tutorial. In this video, we're going to take a look at creating functions. Now, a function can be used many ways, but the way that we're going to explore it here in this video is how we can use a function to create a more complex input parameter. Now, we're going to pick up where we left off in Chapter 3. It was the Part 4 video where we took this rust and this metal, these two base materials, and we blended them here with a material color blend. At the end of that video, we actually exposed two parameters, our rust amount and our dirt amount. And throughout this series, we have been exposing parameters, but we've been doing it on a very basic level. For example, if I come back over here to my base metal, so I'll select this node, and you can see that I do have some instance parameters. These are parameters that we did set up early on in the video. And to expose a parameter, all we've been doing is just coming over to the parameter, clicking this function button, and just choosing expose. And all that does is just promote the parameter to the root level of the graph so that we can use that parameter as it's been set up previously. So now we can use the function here to give us a bit more of a complex input parameter. So now that we're talking about this metal color, if we take a look at our dropdown, we have a series of presets here. And that's all well and good, but what if we wanted to give the user the ability to add a custom input, so a custom color to this? So here in our dropdown, we don't have a way to do that. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to add a custom input here. Then we're going to create a custom function that's going to allow us to swap between the preset color value or our custom color value. So the first thing I'm going to do is, again, I have this metal, this base metal selected, and I have this preset. I'm going to go ahead and expose this preset to the root level here of my graph. That's this root level. So this is the same as we've been doing throughout the series. So we'll come over here to this function button, we'll click the drop down here, and we'll just choose expose. Now, we want to make sure that we set a correct name here, or a custom name, because some of the parameters that we expose, they could have the same names, and thus we could overwrite some of the parameters that we are exposing to that root level. So always make sure you have a unique name. Now, in the case of this metal colors, I actually created this, so I know that this is a very unique name. I'm just going to leave it as is. So we'll click OK. And now we've exposed this guy here to the root, so I can't edit it here. If I double click an empty area on my graph, that takes me up to my root level, and now you'll see that we have this metal color. So I always like to keep my parameters organized, so I want to have the colors at the top. So I can just come over to the left of the parameter, left click, and drag and drop this guy up here towards the top. So now we have this parameter. If we click this arrow here, we get the actual parameter controls here. So this is the actual values we're working with. And like I said, we have a list of presets here. And what I would like to do is add a new option here in this drop-down list for custom. So what I'm going to do is click this add item button. And you can see that the index is now switched to 9, so it just adds 1 to it. And for the actual value itself, I'm going to type in custom. So now I have this new custom option. Now what this is going to do is actually going to break my substance because I don't have any type of custom inside of this substance here. But that's okay, because what we're going to do is when we choose this option here, we're actually going to do a switch to a whole different node, a new uniform color node. So just to give you an idea what I'm talking about. So here I'm just going to double click this node so I can view it here in my 2D view. Now let's just double click out here in the empty area of the graph to get us back to the root. Let's take a look at this metal color, and let's choose this custom option. So I choose it, and you can see what it's going to do here is, well, it's showing me just transparency. There's no option here. We have no color value here. And like I said, that's okay. We're just using this option here just to give the user something to select. So instead of showing this node, we're actually going to switch and show another node. So speaking of another node, let's create one here in our graph. So here I'm going to hit my space bar, and I'm just going to choose a uniform color. So here in the space bar menu, this is our atomic nodes, we'll just choose uniform color. And so now I have a new node here, and just to give it something to start here, I'm just going to just select kind of like a gray value like this. So just setting it with a default color. And now we also want to expose this because this is going to give us kind of the UI that we're going to show to our users so that they can actually choose a custom color. Come over here, we'll click the function button that is in the area for the parameter I want to expose, and we'll expose this. So now this gives me the right input parameter. You can see it says output color. But like I said, this is a pretty common identifier for color nodes. So if I had another color node here in my graph, and I just kept using the same input name, these parameters would kind of overwrite themselves. So I can't stress enough, it's very important for you to click New, and then come into here and make sure that you create a custom input name. So with that, I'm just going to call this custom underscore color. So we'll click OK to set that name, and then OK one more time to expose that out to our root level of our graph. So let's check out that parameter. We double click, takes us to the root level. Here's our custom color, and here is that custom identifier name that I created. So now I know that this will not get overwritten. So let's left click and drag and drop this guy and keep him right underneath that metal color. And you know, let's also give ourselves a label here. So let's just call this custom color. All right, so now that we have this set up, like I said, when the user has selected this custom mode, it's going to break this node, of course, because we don't have any functionality for custom colors within that color parameter node. However, what we can do is just simply route our graph so that we're just viewing this custom node. So next, we want to create a blend. So I'll hit the space bar and I'll choose blend. And so here I have this blend node. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this new uniform color and place this here into the foreground. And actually, so this just makes a little bit more visual sense. Let me put this new custom color up here at the top, and I'll put our blend here. So right now I'm viewing my graph in material mode, and you can see the mode here at the top of the UI. It's in compact material, and so I'm seeing all of my channels because this is this node actually represents a full material. I see all of these channels compiled down into one output. So I'm just going to tap 1 on the keyboard to expand into standard mode. Now I see all of my channels, and it's also indicated here at the top of the UI where I have standard. And so what I'm going to do is take this base color, and I'm going to plug this here into my background. And so here's the connection I have. So in the foreground, I have this new custom color, and here in the background, I have my base color from this metal floor node that we've created in previous videos. So here, the double click to get to the blend node, and let's take a look at our opacity. So with an opacity setting of 1, we see the foreground. And if we take this opacity and we set it to 0, we see the background. So now we can think of this like a switch. 0 is the background and 1 is the foreground. Now we can actually set this blending mode here to this mode called switch. And internally, that will set the Substance Engine to use a more optimized way of blending between this foreground and background. So we want to make sure that we set our blending mode here to switch. So now what we want to do is we want to take the output of our blend, and we're just going to replace here the base color output for that first material that we have plugged into our material blend. So here, if we kind of back out, we can see that what we have represented, we have our metal floor, and this is plugging into the first material input for our material blend, and all we're doing is just replacing this first connection line, which is base color going right to base color. We're going to kind of hijack this value, do a little switch between our uniform, or excuse me, our custom color, and then we're going to output this into our material blend node. So I'm just going to reroute this a bit. All right, so right now you can see that, okay, our 3D view is working again, and that's because here on our blend, our opacity is set to 1, so we're obviously viewing our base, our custom uniform color. All right, so just to kind of clean things up, I'll hit 3 on the keyboard again just to kind of put this back into material mode, and we'll just move our nodes around just so we can, just visually organize what we have here. All right, so this is good. Now we have this blend node, and we have a way to do this. We have a way to switch between a custom, which we have now, or we can switch this to 0, and we go back to using the value here, which is a preset metal from our metal floor. So now what we need to do is come up with a way to drive this opacity setting based on, here I'm going to go to the root level, so double click an empty area in the graph. We want to drive that opacity based on this value that's chosen here from our metal colors. Remember, we added this number 9 option here, which is custom. I'm going to select the blend node, and for this opacity, instead of just exposing this, we're going to drive this with a function. So now I'm going to click this function button, and instead of expose, I'm actually going to choose this empty function option. So when I do this, you can see our parameter, we can no longer edit it, and we now can just click the button here, so just left click to click edit, and this takes us into a new graph, which is called the function graph. And if I hit the space bar here within the function graph, you can see that I get a whole new list of operational nodes that allow me to create functions here within Substance Designer. Also, if we come over to our library, you can see we have a functions category, and we have several of these helper functions that we can use specifically within function graphs. So before we start creating a bunch of nodes, it's always the best idea is to just make sure that you fully understand what it is you want this function to create. So we're going to create some nodes to, create some functionality, and then we're going to output a value. So it's always important to understand what it is we're going to output. So let's just go back to our graph for just a moment, and I'm going to create just a new blend node. So let's go back to this new blend node here, and notice again we're talking about opacity. And as I start to change this slider value, you can see it's a single value that we're working with. It's just a slider, but the format that this slider is using for data is a float. So notice we have this decimal number here. Now we're going to use just 1 or 0, but we need to understand that the output value that we need to create in our function for this to work, it has to be a float type. So that's where I'm getting this from. So here, we'll delete this guy. We don't need it. Let's go back here into our tab here that was created. This is our function graph. So I think it's always beneficial to kind of write out your thought process, like, what it is that you want to accomplish within this function. And that's especially important when you're just starting out creating functions. So what I'm going to do is just come over here to this comment here. I'm just going to create a comment. I'm going to write out just some things that I want this function to accomplish. So I went ahead and just wrote out some steps here that I want to do. So number one, the first thing I want to do is I want to grab that user selected value from the drop-down list. I want to see what the user selected. And once I have that value, I want to check to see if that user selected either a preset or did they select that custom value. Now, if they selected the custom value, then I know I need to output a 1 for opacity because that custom node is placed in the foreground of my blend, which is going to mean a value of 1 for the opacity. Now, if the value selected is actually one of the presets, then I know that I want to output a 0 to get that preset value. Because again, remember the base color from our preset node is being fed into the background. So as far as opacity goes, that means a value of 0. So these are the steps that we want to accomplish. So now we're going to do that by just creating some nodes here in our function graph. First, let's grab that user selected value. So let me jump back over here to my main graph, double click to get to that root level, and let's take a look at this metal color parameter. So if I drop this guy down, you can see that every parameter you create is going to have a type, so a type, and it's going to have an editor. Now for the editor, it's simple, it's just a drop-down list. Now for the type though, if I click this drop-down, you can see there's all kinds of types that we can use. There's integers and floats and string and boolean and so on. Now this particular parameter here, its type is set to integer 1. So that gives me the clue that I need to know what type of variable I need to grab in my function. Now, we also need to have a way to reference this specific parameter. And you always do that by using the identifier. So here we know that the identifier for this parameter is metal underscore colors. And this is the name that I gave it. So now that we have this information, let's go back over to our function tab and let's get that information. So we'll hit the space bar. Now I want to use get, so I start to type get. And our nodes here get filtered, and we have get float 3. We get all these options here. We know that the type for this guy is integer 1, so we just want to grab this guy here, get integer. So that gives us a node here. Now in our drop down, we can choose some options here, and you can see that, well, our metal colors is available to us because it is a parameter that uses the type of integer 1, and that's what we're trying to grab here in our function. So I'll just select this option here, and now I've already taken care of this first bullet point here where we grab the user selected value from the drop-down list. So this node is now going to give us whatever option is chosen from that drop-down list. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to check to see if this is the custom value. So let's jump back over here to our graph, double click to go to the root level, and let's look at our values here for this metal color. So we can see that the values here, this is using just basic like an index array notation. So in this case, it's starting at 0 and it goes all the way up to 9. And I know that this custom option here is actually a value of 9. So this is the value that's going to be returned to us from that variable that we just created here in our opacity function graph. So I know that, well, number 9 equals custom. Okay, so let's go back to our tab, and we're going to use that to check to see if we are at the custom value. So what I'm going to do here is hit my space bar again, and I'll start to type in equal, and well, we have an equal node. This is a comparison node, so I'll left click to create this, and this gives me two inputs here, an A and a B. And what this does is it says it's going to output basically a conditional, meaning is it true or false. It's going to say is A and B equal, either it's going to be true or A and B is going to be false, so it's going to output false. So what I want to do is take my metal color. I know this is going to be an integer between 0 and 9. I'm going to plug this into A. So now I need to check it against something. So let's just hit the space bar, and I'm going to start to type integer, and it gets filtered here, and this first node is what I need, so I'll left click this guy, and this gives me a constant integer. Now what I can do with this node is select it. I can come over here to my slider, I'll double click, and I'll type 9 and hit enter to save this. So now I can see that this constant represents a value of 9. And I'm going to take the output of this guy and plug it into B. So at this stage, we've gone over here, we've reached out to our root level, and we've grabbed our variable for metal colors, and we're checking to see if it's equal to 9. And if it is, it's going to output a true, and if it's not, it's going to output a false. So this white output that we have here, this is going to be a conditional output. You'll notice that whenever we create nodes here within a function graph, the outputs and inputs are going to be color-coded. So for example, this yellow represents integer. So here these two nodes are both an integer because the outputs are both yellow. I know that this is a comparison node because its output is white. As another example, let's say that I hit the space bar and I create float, and you can see that now this is a floating point value, and you can see that its output is green. So the output and the input color is going to let you know the type of data that you're working with. So let's just remove this float node. So now we need to do a little if-else statement. We need to say if this is true, then we want to output a 1, and if it's false, we need to output a 0. And we can do that by just hitting the space bar, and right here at the top, you'll see that we have this if-else node. So let's create this guy. And so here you can see that the first input is a white, so it's a conditional, and we have a conditional, so let's plug this in. So now we're going to get two options here, an if and an else. So if this statement here that we've just created is true, then it's going to output this value here, the second input on our if else. And if this statement here is false, it's going to output whatever we have here for the third input on our if else node. So we know that we need a float value. Remember, our opacity needs to output as 0 to 1, but it has to be a floating point value. So let's hit the space bar. Let's start to type float, and we'll create ourselves a float node. Now we're going to need two of these guys, so I'm going to select this, and I can just hit Control D on the keyboard just to duplicate it. You could just go and create another one if you like, but just shortcut, we could just duplicate it. So let's just plug these guys in. So one will go into the if, and one will go into the else. So here's what we have. Now let's look at our statement here. So we know that if the custom value is selected, so this statement is going to be true, we want to output a 1 for opacity. That's going to be our foreground. So let's select this float, and let's just set this all the way to 1. Now, if this statement here is false, meaning that it's not the custom input from that drop-down, we've selected a preset, we want to output 0 for our opacity, which is going to be our background. So this is going to take care of everything that we need. And here you can see that this if statement here is taking care of this part of what we wanted to do. We've got this little conditional node, which is taking care of our check. And then here we're able to use this get variable to grab the selected value from the user in that drop-down list. So this creates our function. Now the last thing that we need to do is we need to set a node as output. That means that it's basically going to feed whatever calculation we've done here in this function graph. It's going to feed that value out to the parameter. Well, we know that this node is going to output here either a 1 float or a 0 floating point value. So this is going to actually give us what we need. So all we have to do is just right-click this node, and I can just set this as output. So here this node turns yellow, meaning that this is the output node. I don't see any errors, so we're good to go. So now let's go back to our main graph, and we'll just zoom out here a bit so we can see the entire graph. Let's double click to go over to our root level. And let's check this out. So here we're going to come over to our input parameters. I'll click this drop down, and you can see that, well, I have custom selected. So just to make sure this is working, let's come over. Well, actually, I'm sorry, we already had that exposed. We can do it all from here. And actually, kind of a good way to preview this is just to come over to our input parameters and click this little page button. That's going to switch you into preview mode. So now we can view this just like a user would. So here we've got our custom color. All right, well, let's set a custom color. Let's just do something, really kind of out there, like orange or red or something, so we can make sure this is working. All right, so under custom, you can see that, well, we've now changed that metal value. Let's take this drop down now and choose one of our presets. Let's go back to iron. So I choose iron, and now you can see that the graph gets rerouted here through our opacity node. So that's how you use functions here inside of Substance Designer. In this case, we created this function here within that blend so that we could create a more complex way of switching between a foreground and input for our blend, so we could introduce some new functionality with our color preset. Now, this also makes this substance much more reusable, because now we have the ability for a user to choose, some metal color presets, but then we also give them the ability to set up their own user-defined colors as well. And when it comes to creating substances, you always want to try to keep the idea of reusability as the core usage. That means you can build a substance as a base material, you can build it once, and it can be reused in many, many different situations.